What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's transfer tips for Game Week 36. And I'm going to start off by talking about Solly March, who's been incredibly frustrating to own the last few game weeks. Came off before the 60th minute in the 6-0 win against Wolves. No attacking returns. Benched against Man United. Comes on, looks good. No returns. Then last night, benched again. De Zerbi said he wasn't in a good moment. That seemed to be related to fitness. He comes off the bench at half time. Within 10 minutes, him and Enciso looked like Brighton's best two players, like better than anyone had really done in the first half. But then he pulls up with a hamstring injury and goes off before he's able to get a goal or an assist. Now, at the time recording, De Zerbi after the game has only said he doesn't know how long he's going to be out for, but it didn't look good. I'm fully expecting him to miss Game Week 36, probably 37 as well, and lots of people speculating that he could now just be out for the season. Obviously, if money's not tight, there's no rush to move him on. You can wait and see what De Zerbi says in the press conference on Friday, and hopefully he'll give an update about exactly how long he'll be out for. But for now, I'm just going to assume he's definitely going to miss 36 and probably 37 as well, and talk about kind of possible replacements. Now, I think for most people, there's kind of two ways they're going to play this. They're either going to move him to a different Brighton midfielder, and I'll come on to them in a minute, or they're just going to bench him because it's not worth taking a -4. And lots of people have benches this week that they're not particularly happy with. So if you look at my team, for example, at the moment, I'm not going to get into a big discussion about who I'm going to play right now in this video. We'll save that for team selection. But I've got Trent and Shaw on the bench. So if I didn't have the money to move March on to a different Brighton midfielder, I'd possibly not take the -4 because there's probably not one that's worth it for my team, and just play Trent instead. And for a lot of you, if you're already playing Trent, you could just play Luke Shaw, or if you've put a Brighton defender on the bench, you could play them instead. So there's not a massive panic to get rid of him, especially if it's going to cost you 4 points. If you are in a position where you've got a bit of money to spend, the obvious replacement, unless you've got like 2, 3, 4 million in the bank, even then, the probable obvious replacement is just to go to whichever Brighton midfielder you don't own out of Mitoma and McAllister if you're on a 2 Brighton midfielder setup. So for me, I've got March and Mitoma. I would just probably move March to McAllister. If you've got March and McAllister, then March to Mitoma looks like a pretty good bet. I know they've just lost 5-1 to Everton, right? Not a great result whatsoever. Nobody predicted that. Some people might have predicted a 5-1, but that would have been to Brighton, not Everton. But Brighton still created plenty of chances. I think on expected goals, they were slightly higher. They hit the woodwork a couple of times. So even though they've got Arsenal away, Newcastle away, and Man City at home as 3 of their next 4 fixtures, I think the fact they've got back-to-back double game weeks means we should still be looking to target those players, especially when they're such good value. And look, Mitoma wasn't necessarily great last night. There were a few times where he went past Patterson, but it didn't really result in too many, massive chances created or anything like that. But he still looks pretty exciting. Got the assist as well for maybe the slightly fortunate McAllister goal. And if you've got Mitoma and you're looking to go to McAllister, okay, maybe it's not the most exciting time to buy him because he is playing a little bit deeper, but his numbers are still looking pretty good for a player that's that cheap. He looks nailed still, and obviously he's their first choice penalty taker as well. So even though, he's maybe not Mac 10 at the moment, maybe he's Mac 6 instead. If you look at the underlying numbers, like against Everton, 1.13 expected goals. That's no penalties involved with that whatsoever. Obviously, there was against Man United. Against Wolves, 0.26 expected assists, only played 25 minutes. Against Forest, 0.3 expected goals, 0.37 expected assists, etc. These are still pretty good numbers for a player that only costs 5.5 million, also takes penalties, and that I'm not really expecting to miss too many of the next 5 matches. I think the rotation that people are talking about, look, it happened once. McAllister and Mitoma missed 1 game. They've played kind of both since then. March missed out, but that seems to have been more injury related. There hasn't been a massive amount of rotation. Like Buonanotte starting last night, that was instead of March. Again, not in a good moment. Welbeck and Undav, they're starting at the moment, but I don't think that's rotation. It's just that Ferguson hasn't been fit. And the reason that McAllister is playing deeper isn't necessarily because of Enciso, although him playing well is helping that situation. It's that Gross is having to play right back. So if at any point Veltman comes back in or someone like that to play right back and Gross goes into midfield, McAllister might go further forward anyway. So the obvious replacements, if you're on 2 Brighton midfielders, is just a switch to whichever one you don't own. If there's some of you out there who want to take a punt, or you're on a 3 midfield setup, then I guess the only other 2 options really are Gross, who is fairly nailed when he's fit, but obviously playing right back is not ideal, but he does get forward and he does take some set pieces as well, so you could look at him at 5.4, or if March is going to be out, the guy that's been playing there instead of him is Buonanotte, who, I mean, I'm going to be honest, I only really knew this name a couple of game weeks ago. He has played a few minutes before that, but not very often. I think it was when he started against Forest that most of us came to realise that he was a thing at Brighton. He's only 4.5 million, and he's probably going to be the main kind of beneficiary of March missing out. So he's a little bit cheaper. And maybe that's helpful in the future game weeks where you're going to need that. I know when I say future game weeks, there's hardly any left. But in game week 38, for example, I've looked at transfers that week. And if you've got Trent and Fernandes and Harden and Salah, etc., there's not a huge amount of money to go around to kind of start putting funds elsewhere. So he might be a nice punt, but I mean, it's not guaranteed that he's going to go and start every single game, even if March is out. So the obvious moves are McAllister. If you don't want to go to a Brighton midfielder and you want another double game weeker, it's got to be a Newcastle midfielder. We'll talk about them later on. Otherwise, you're maybe going back to something like an Arsenal midfielder who've got Brighton at home, then I think it's Forest away, and then Wolves at home last day of the season. But I just think when you've got back-to-back double game weeks, Brighton is just the obvious place to go, and that's probably what I'm going to do. So yeah, I think for most people, you've either got the funds to go to a Brighton midfielder or you're just not taking a hit and you're just playing someone off your bench instead. But depending on what De Zerbi says, Solly March has probably got to go. All right, let's talk about Callum Wilson and Newcastle forwards in general, which I expect we're going to do quite a lot before that deadline on Saturday. Now, I know the early kickoff in game week 36 is Leeds versus Newcastle, so a lot of people are expecting early team news. And of course, if you can wait till as late as possible to make your transfers, that's what you should do. But I think there's different scenarios to think about either way. Plus, we might not get that early team news, and some of you might need to move a little bit earlier because there's a shortage of funds to go around. So we're going to discuss it right now. The first thing to get out of the way is what if you want to go for Isak and Wilson. Now, I spoke about this last week. I don't think there's really a huge issue with doing it in game week 36 specifically. They're both priced around 7 million. So if you look at the fixtures in 36, you're not missing out on a huge amount of other forwards that I'd be massively worried about, right? Watkins against Spurs at home. You've probably got Solanke, Palace away. Brentford versus West Ham. You've got Tony and Antonio. Calvert-Lewin maybe against Man City. Jesus against Brighton. These are not forwards that I would necessarily worry about. I think most people expect Wilson and Isak to get at least one start. I guess there is a scenario where that doesn't happen, but that's what most people are expecting. And to be fair, the only thing to think about is if you go for the double attack, what could you be doing instead with those 3 spots? It's double defence, and most people with double defence aren't expecting 2 clean sheets. They're probably not even expecting 1. So it's not really a huge issue to go for both. The only thing I would think about is if you get both in and then only one starts against Leicester, which is a great fixture in game week 37, do you then have to use a transfer that you don't really want to use to get rid of one of them? And then does that affect you for game week 38? That's the only thing I would think about if you're going for both. But in 36 specifically, I don't see a huge issue. Let's talk about the other scenario where you're only going for one of these players, which ones you buy. And I think the answer, without the team sheet, has to be Isak. And even if we get the early team news, the only way I wouldn't put Isak as the number 1 is if Wilson starts against Leeds and Isak doesn't. But I just don't really see that happening. Like, if you look over the last 10 games for Newcastle in the league, Isak has started 8 of them. The only 2 that he's missed out is quick turnarounds for midweek, so that could happen for the Brighton game on Thursday for double game week 36. Callum Wilson's only started 3 of them, and obviously 2 were when Isak missed out, and the other one was when both started together against Arsenal, and that didn't really go to plan. Now, I don't think it's fair to say that cannot work from the start, because it was a game against Arsenal. That was always going to be tough. And when Wilson came on against Southampton, it did work really well. So Eddie Howe might want to trial it again against Leeds. That seems like a better fixture to do it in. But a lot of it's probably going to depend on the fitness of other players, and people have been talking about Longstaff, and Eddie Howe actually name-checked him when he was asked about Isak and Wilson starting together, and he said something like, given the performances, he thinks it can work, and because Longstaff is out, it creates a gap. So when Longstaff is fit, imagine Longstaff being the key to our FPL decisions. When Longstaff is fit, the midfield is Willock, Bruno Guimaraes and Longstaff. And then you've got someone on the right, which has been Jacob Murphy recently. One of the number 9s, either Isak or Wilson. And then Joelinton plays on the left. So when Longstaff misses out, Joelinton goes into midfield. And then someone else has to play in that left kind of wing spot, which was Isak against Arsenal. But the game before, it was Gordon. And also, St. Maximin's now back fit as well. So it's interesting because from an FPL point of view, everyone's loving Wilson and expecting him to start that Leeds game, especially with the rest, which could happen. But if you go and look up Newcastle fans' predictions that aren't necessarily into FPL, most of them have a front three, which is Isak as the number 9 and like Almiron and St. Maximin or Murphy and St. Maximin or something like that. So it's not a guarantee that Wilson starts Leeds. And if they both start and we get that news, then I do think when they play together, Wilson's the better option for that specific game because he's probably ahead on penalties. He's also playing more central. Isak is a lot wider, at least he was against Arsenal. But if they both start, I feel like Isak's then much more likely to start the Brighton game. So then you're going to get 2 starts in the double. So does his minutes put him ahead of Wilson, who's probably a higher goal threat when he's on the pitch? I think it probably does. And he's probably more likely to go and get you the game week 37 and 38 game because it's quite clear he is ahead in the pecking order. And I don't think Wilson's goals recently have kind of put him ahead. When they switched to one striker against Arsenal, it was Wilson that went off and Isak moved into the number 9. So I think if you're buying one, unless you just want to go for a bit of a differential, I think minutes-wise, it's kind of got to be Isak. And a lot of people are going to be thinking, well, hang on a second, right? Would it not make sense to play Wilson for Leeds and just rest Isak for the Brighton game? Because I think if you're Eddie Howe, you definitely prefer to have Isak for Brighton than Leeds. But I don't think you can just presume you're going to beat Leeds, right? You've just lost to Arsenal. Top 4 is not in doubt, but it's in more of a doubt than it was before that game. You've got to go and beat Leeds. There's 6 days rest, and Isak's probably been their best attacker. Why would he not start that game? And then the Brighton game is at home on Thursday, so it's Saturday 12:30, then Thursday 7:30 kickoff. That's a big gap. And then even the Leicester game in 37 isn't until Monday. So they've got an extra day's rest there as well. So maybe I'm being a little bit confident as an Isak owner. And I would say be careful that subconsciously I'm not biased, right? Because I own him and I want him to be the one because I can't afford to get Wilson. But I feel like there's a good chance he gets 2 or 3 starts in the next 3 games for Newcastle. And I think it's pretty clear on all the evidence we have that he is ahead in the pecking order. So if you're only buying one and you want the guy that's going to be on the pitch the most, I feel like it's got to be Isak. And if you want to go for both, go for it. But if it's just going to be one, I'm saying Isak. If we get the team sheet and Wilson starts against Leeds and Isak doesn't, completely different conversation. For 36, Wilson then definitely becomes the better option. I just don't see that happening. I think they either both start and then Isak gets Brighton as well, or just Isak starts and Wilson doesn't, in which case, why would you want him anyway? He maybe starts against Brighton, maybe doesn't. So, I don't know. Let me know in the comments below how wrong I am about this, but I feel like most Newcastle fans are pretty clear that Isak is first choice striker for them at the moment. Maybe I've got it wrong. Let me know in the comments below. So there's probably not a huge amount of you out there looking to bring in a Newcastle midfielder this week, but there's definitely some of you, because when I looked at the transfers in for their midfielders, Joelinton was the highest at nearly 40,000 new owners. And don't get me wrong, if I was wildcarding this week picking 5 mids, would one of them be a Newcastle player? Probably not, but maybe it makes sense for some of your teams, or maybe you just want to do things a little bit different. We've got a double game week in 36 and 37 where a lot of us are already well prepared. We're not looking to move players around. For double game week 36, most people have 2 Brighton midfielders and then either Steele or a defender. And for Newcastle, it's usually Trippier plus 2 forwards or Trippier and another defender, and then one of the forwards. Most people don't have a midfielder. So in terms of differentials, there's not a huge amount of options. Maybe this is the best way to go. And to be fair, they've got Leeds away, good fixture. Bonus of having a double game week, even if it's Brighton at home. Then even in game week 37, if you had to play that Newcastle midfielder, Leicester at home is not a bad fixture. They are a team that find it really difficult to keep clean sheets. So it wouldn't necessarily be my first port of call when it comes to transfers in this week, but I don't completely hate it either. The question is Joelinton the one to bring in for 6 million? Possibly. He's absolutely nailed. If, like I said earlier, if Longstaff's back, then hopefully he would play kind of on the left wing. If not, he goes into midfield. But looking at the underlying numbers, 0.25 expected goals per 90, 0.08 expected assists. It's okay for that kind of price, but I think you can do better. So even if you just wanted to go for one of the other nailed on players, I think Willock might be slightly better. And if you look at his numbers recently, like against Arsenal, 0.29 expected goals, tiny bit of expected assists. But even just going through all these recent games, he is getting chances and he's also creating them as well. So I think given the role those two are playing right now, Willock might be the slightly better option. The other thing that I like about him is he's only 4.7 million. Now, money might not matter a huge amount, but depending on how your team is set up, it could do in game week 38. And most of us have like I've got Greenwood, right? But some of you out there will have a squad of playing players, basically a front eight. So maybe you've got Solanke instead of Greenwood, or you've got whoever it might be. Maybe you've got a Watkins in there. Having someone a little bit cheaper that you could bench in future weeks might not be a bad thing either. So while you might not need the 1.3 million he says over Joelinton right now, you might do by the time you get to game week 38. So for example, for my team, my next few transfers probably going to be something like McAllister in for, let me just get rid of the Newcastle filter. McAllister in for March. I'd probably look to get a Man City defender in 37, right? So let's say I do that. I've only got 0.4 million with 2 transfers in game week 38 to start switching things around. So unless I want to take loads of hits, money's quite tight. So there's not really a lot of exciting things I can do. So that's only a minor thing, but I do like the fact that Willock's a little bit cheaper and his underlying numbers are a little bit better. The more exciting midfield picks would, of course, be someone like an Almiron at 5.4 or even a St. Maximin at 6.1. But that's even kind of more of a punt. That one, you're getting a Newcastle midfielder when most people aren't, but also he's only just back from fitness. So he only got 12 minutes against Arsenal and he hasn't played since the double in 29. Now, usually he's fairly nailed-ish when he's fit, but it's hard to know exactly how many minutes he's going to get for Leeds away, Brighton at home. But if you wanted to go punty, he would be a lot more interesting than both Willock and Joelinton, I would say. But obviously they do have options for that left wing spot. Isak could play there, then Wilson up front. So Maximin could start one game but not the other. If Longstaff was fit, Joelinton can play there. So it's not a guarantee that he would start, but he is a bit more interesting. And then similarly with Almiron, he would probably play on the right, but someone like Jacob Murphy, if I can find him here, where is he? Why can't I find it? Oh, here. Yeah. He's been playing a lot recently as well. He actually seems to be first choice there. So he might also be another one, a bit like Willock, where you get someone nice and cheap at 4.2 million, hopefully get 2 starts out of him. And then if you don't have to play him in 37 or 38, he's not really holding a huge amount of your money. So, like I said at the start, would I be actively looking to fill up one of my midfield slots with a Newcastle player? Probably not. But if you want to go for a double game week that's not Brighton, you are very limited with options in 36. It's got to be Newcastle. So if I was bringing one in, I'd go for one of the unless you wanted to punt on St. Maximin, I'd go for Murphy or Willock and just take that money out of the team, knowing that they're just as attacking as Joelinton, if not more anyway. And with Leeds away, Leicester at home in the next 2, maybe it'd be okay. But I wouldn't want to play them in every single game week remaining, because I know Chelsea away looks easy on paper given how they've defended recently, but it's not really the type of game where you'd want to stick in a Newcastle midfielder. So just see what it does to your team over the next few weeks. Not the worst option, I would say. If you've enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll catch you again tomorrow.